back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This is episode number 59, and this week we're reviewing Margin Call. This is a movie that essentially details the events of a financial firm during the stages leading up to the financial crisis back in 2000. It was basically like around 2007, 2008, and 2009. Was when the hardest hitting years were for the financial crisis. This movie has a pretty star-studded cast, which makes it obviously enjoyable. There's some really good performances, specifically from, I don't know, we can go down the list. We'll talk about all the actors, but this is also directed by J.C. Chander, and I'm not too familiar. I didn't actually do a deep dive as to what other films he's directed in the past. You might have a better idea, Chris. But overall, this is one of my favorite films that I've seen throughout the years, and I'm excited to get back into this because I think I first saw this movie about 10 years ago and thought it would be good to bring up for our pod. But anyway, I just kind of want to get your initial thoughts on this movie.
Yeah, before I get into that, the director, I feel like this is the only film of his I've seen. I know he's done some other films. It seems like he doesn't make movies that frequently, actually. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I don't know much about his background, but it seems like he's only made 6 films, and this is one of the 6. And his first one was in 2004. So it seems like he probably selects projects. I think this film, in financial circles on Wall Street, even now, I listen to a podcast called The Compound. They even talk about this film sometimes. So,
of course,
and in their opinion, it holds up to the era and the time period. And I think also, there's been other films about finance, like there's The Big Short. There's what's the other one that was like really popular?
Wall Street.
Yeah, Wolf on Wall Street. But I think this one is good. I think why finance people like it is because it's out of those. Like The Big Short was like The Big Short was like the perfect blend of like being technical but then being accessible. This is really like.
And also using comedic relief in that movie.
Yeah.
That's what also made it different.
But Margin Call is like, even the roles and like how they talk is like how finance people talk, even though it's acted. I want to stay to the film, but this film does bring back memories of my youth. But
I think it is for anyone who's in the millennials in their late 20s to early 30s.
Yeah, it brings memories of my youth, but also who I was at a certain time in my life and what I was. It's just the timing. The movie, it came out when I was in college, but like the timing of that era, we'll get into. But and how it shaped my life, unfortunately.
Life, dude.
Yeah, but I can only speak to my own great personal experience. But anyways, but no, the movie's like really, it's well crafted, great pacing. I mean, obviously the actors, you have to really butcher the script to have them not perform. I think one thing that's really underrated about this film is probably, even though they do have a lot of technical jargon, you never feel too lost, which is hard with these kind of films, or any film that's not like, let's say most people wouldn't know what risk management is and stuff like that, and what their job is, or the computer models and stuff like that. I would also say this film, to let you chime in, I think it's also one of the films that is just, it's almost the perfect timing, right? Like it comes out
several years after.
Supposedly when we're recovering, again, I don't want to get too deep into that right now, but supposedly when we are, the Obama administration is pounding the table that we're coming out of this recession and this financial crisis. But we'll talk about that later and how that maybe gave birth to future crises. But like it's also a time. I think the film also benefits from a timing aspect of like it comes out at the right time for people's consciousness too. While others, if you ignore documentaries, other films would come out later, right? Like The Big Short and Wolf on Wall Street. So
right, I think Wolf on Wall Street. So this film came out in 2011. Wolf on Wall Street, I believe, was 2013, and Big Short 2015.
Yeah,
so a 2 year space between each film.
And what's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on this film, other than your introduction?
Yeah, personally, like I mean, how can you not? I mean, I know a lot's happened with Kevin Spacey over the last 5 years in allegations, but in terms of an acting performance in this film, he's one of the best. I mean, he. What I liked about his film so much is he brought a really human aspect in a way to his character because the actions that were made by the corporation, right? They wanted to survive. So it was basically a survival of the fittest mentality. We need to be first or best, or there's a line that Jeremy Irons brings up that we'll talk about. But he says, dude, you're gonna burn every trader and their reputation if you go along with these moves. And so he really thought, I think he really cared about the survival of the firm, but he really cared about the individuals that he was responsible for there too. And so it was this hard line that his character was trying to balance there. I thought he did a phenomenal job knocking that out because he was managing all the day traders on the floor. Jeremy Irons, I mean, what can you say about his character? Fantastic in terms of the way he portrayed his, like, you know what, we do what we got to do to survive. That's it. That's what's most important. That's the only thing that's important, really, in his mind. And then Zachary Quinto, I've seen him in several other projects, though. You know that actor that you see that you've seen him before, but you can't name like something you've seen or like what you've seen him in. That's kind of how I felt about his character. Like I've seen him in other projects. Did a good job. Kind of this quirky dude who supposedly in his character had gotten his PhD in MIT from. I can't remember exactly. It was some type of mechanical engineering, but looking at a lot of like different thermodynamics. So he's really good at crunching.
He did rocket propulsion.
Rocket propulsion. That's what it was.
Also, it's funny. I have a hard time remembering his name, but to me, he's the 21st century Spock for a generation as a sci-fi guy.
Yeah, he's one of the quants basically, which Wall Street did a good bit sucking up a lot of these guys to crunch complex models.
Yeah. I think also maybe a bias I have in liking this film is that this film doesn't try to like explain like the backdrop. They kind of assume like you'll pick it up or know a bit. So just to give context, right? The reason they're in this crisis mode, right? So we have to rewind the clock, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of financial institutions became over-levered in what they call mortgage-backed securities, and then used those mortgage-backed securities, chopped them up into credit default swap. Okay, I don't want to get too technical, but yeah. And part of the risk assessment of could this blow up in our faces was derived from quants, who we see some of the actors. The risk assessment guy, he's on another division, but what's the female character's name? Demi Moore, whoever she plays. Demi Moore's character, she's like the head of that division, right? And that meeting they have, so early in the film when things start becoming hairy for them, it's interesting to see like the traders, like Kevin Spacey represents them. So before we get to more technical details, what's interesting about the film, whether it's a good film.
So by the way, Demi's character is Sarah.
Okay. In that room with before Jeremy Irons gets there, right? You have Kevin Spacey represents the traders, like you said. You have the what's his name? The guy the risk assessment guy, Peter Sullivan and his crew. They represent risk assessment, right? So that these guys, their whole job is to make sure that
there were only two of them. It was him and his buddy, because that manager got fired that day.
Yeah, and then Demi Moore, Sarah, her character represents the math gurus, right? The quants, right? And that by itself is interesting because there probably were meetings like that, probably maybe on phones though. But it's a good physical representation of not all the aspects, because we didn't hear much about legal and compliance there, but they would be involved too.
I think she's on the compliance team.
Okay,
I could be wrong.
Is the way she talked about the models and stuff, it seemed like
I think they looked at this, right? They're the heavy hitters. Him and Ramesh, whose character was it? Because they looked at them. They're like, let's meet back here in 30 minutes to look at his report that Peter Sullivan had produced. And they're like, no, the numbers check out on first glance, basically.
Yeah, and so going back to the backdrop of this film, right? Because again, this film takes place, like you said, right? Supposing this mythical firm, right when they're starting to realize that their models are screwed up. Yeah, and like they're totally over leveraged. that if these, you know, these, which they did, these, if these mortgages collapse, like they're totally hosed, right? And going back to what I was saying before about credit default swaps, what ended up happening is that a lot of loans, and again, this is painful for me to repeat, a lot of loans that were in these mortgages were AAA backed, even though they shouldn't have been. Like, it's just a whole.
Oh, they were rated AAA.
Yeah, they were graded AAA to credit
because they were diversified, even though they were made up of very risky loans.
Yeah, because they were chopped up, supposedly. I mean, they were chopped up, but it's like it doesn't change the fact that they're all risky, but whatever. Anyways, you could see that there's a rolling door of corruption there. And so, you know, this firm has been making money, but like I said, it was all, you know, it was, what's the term? Like a casino, right? And again, risk assessment, the movie starts with risk assessment. What's his name? The guy that got fired, which was an intense moment for the early in the film. Eric Dale, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Eric Dale. Exactly.
He starts going through Peter Sullivan's report and realizing that, wait, they're about to be hosed. And,
well, he was working on a model, and he gave him the USB drive before they left.
Oh yeah, the other way around. Yeah, he was working on a model, and Peter Sullivan finished it. Yeah,
yes.
And it sets the chain of events that we're going to talk about in the movie. But I just want to talk about how like they just assume you, the viewer, lived through it, right? At least the mainstream version of it. Obviously, it's a lot more technical and stuff, but basically that's the quick version. Is that, you know, there are new financial instruments to make money off of leverage, which led to
VAR is.
Yeah, led to nothing. Sorry, go ahead.
I said, do you want to explain what you know, because they looked at the model and the VAR, like it was out of the bounds of the limits of the VAR. You want to explain what that is?
I mean, I'm not a big fan of the value at risk thing because like I'm not the biggest fan of quants, but if you want to explain it, you can go right ahead, dude.
Because that's what sets the tone, and that's when they can start to notice that they thought in reality, all right, fine. The gist of it is based on their models. The conclusion they made was they were carrying way, way more risk than they ever thought they were carrying. And because of that, that's dangerous because the amount of risk they were taking on was more than the entire capitalization of the company. It was more than the company was worth. It's crazy, but that's how much leverage you're talking about. And fortunately, in certain countries, that still seems to be the case. And we can talk about that more later.
So this is my gripe with VAR or VAR here, and not to be confused with VAR as soccer.
Yeah,
is that this got really popular after in the late 80s, and it didn't avoid the 87 crash.
Nope.
So I don't understand typical Wall Street mentality of like, oh,
the 2000s.com bust.
We just didn't have enough data. Like they always say the model's gonna work next time. Like these people are just okay.
Well, but this is where people like Nassim Taleb come in, where they're like, you underestimate the amount of risk you're taking on with your models. Yes. You're assuming typical Gaussian distributions in a way. Now, I'm oversimplifying. But essentially, the risk at the tail ends, you're underestimating how much risk is actually there.
Yeah, and so even though there's a lot of technical jargon and the backdrop, and even in this movie, what I like also about this film is that it does focus what I think is the core, and hopefully we'll get to it in a sec. But the core message to me in this film is like, it's really Jeremy Irons' character, the CEO, because he has a lot of lines, but like to me when he says like there are fat cats, yeah, if there always will be fat cats and stray dogs or starving dogs, I think he says that. I always forgot that line really always resonated with me, that like there are always, unfortunately, no matter what the communists believe, there will always be winners and losers.
Sure.
And yeah, like he wanted to make sure that he in the end, like, yeah, he'll suffer pain, but we'll survive. And it's true. If you look at and this place, 2011, right? So they get these egregious bailouts. And that's the official bailouts. The official bailouts was the 700 whatever billion. The real bailout was the Federal Reserve buying the assets and putting on our balance sheet as a public taxpayer, which is, I don't want to cuss, but it was egregious. But that was the real bailout. Everybody says the bailout was like, oh, the 700 billion. Like, that was like
it was QE is what it was. That was
it was the QE that was the real bailout. I was like, yeah, like, can you imagine? Like, I mean, I would not imagine I live this, but but it's egregious. And then all these bank bankers, I'm not going to say banksters because they were never criminally charged, and I have to respect that. These bankers, they go in front of Congress going like, "Oh, we had no idea. It's just anomaly."
Can I ask you a question? Because this might be my ignorance, even though I've been reading a book on financial crisis.
Oh, the Bethany news.
For these firms that hold MBSs, they don't abide by the same rules that typical banks who lend mortgages have, right? Where with your banks that lend a mortgage, typically you'd have to have they abide by fractional reserve banking, which means that if you give out, I don't know the exact number, I'm just throwing out a scenario. If you get like $100 million worth of loans out, and if you have to have 7% of that in actual liquidity, then you have to have like $7 million in the bank at that given moment. Do they actually have like a fractional amount that do they require these firms who are trading MBSs? Do they have to have an actual like liquid reserve on hand that was a percentage of the total mortgage-backed securities they were taking on?
So two things. One is Chris Martin explains fractional reserve banking the best I've ever seen. First of all, fractional reserve banking is a scam because they always say like, oh, you have to have 10% of your 10%. Like basically, you could basically chop up your 10%. Basically, the answer is no. And that's why whenever there's a big crash and there's a liquidity crisis, the Fed has to come in and rescue because they never have liquidity. They just never do. And it's built in the system. But the way you're talking about when investment banks were allowed to do the business of commercial banks is because Glass-Steagall was repealed by the Clinton administration. Again, the Clintons love to just torture me. But they did that. And, because the argument at the time was, we need to unleash capital. I mean, I heard this so many times actually in my life because you hear from VCs now. But basically, these rule changes allow, bankers to go crazy. And fractional banking.
That was sort of the Bernanke model. And who was it before that? Greenspan?
So Greenspan, the issue with Greenspan is that Greenspan was big on. It's funny, that guy grew up being like groomed by Volcker, like inflation, and then he became the bubble guy, which I don't understand. And Bernanke, I'm gonna be honest with you, my personal thesis that he wanted to test out the PhD thesis he wrote, and that's why he did all the moves he did.
All based on the Great Depression.
Exactly. And he's convinced that he succeeded, but we'll leave that for another minute. But definitely, with Greenspan, like the problem with Greenspan is that it's all contextual, right? So like there is the inflation of the 70s and 80s that ousts Jimmy Carter, that puts in Reagan. Volcker comes to Reagan. I'm simplifying, but based on what I understand, the books I read, Volcker comes to Reagan saying like, look, if we can kill inflation, we can, get this economy booming, but we got to take the pain for 2 to 3 years. This is, look, everybody respects Volcker, but you can show how politics works in our country. Reagan understands that, okay, this sucks. It's going to hurt my ratings, but this guy's not that dumb. He understands the long game. He says, okay, this gives me a chance though with his team. So he agrees with Volcker. Let's do it. Let's increase interest rates to historic levels that we've never seen since actually.
He wished that they would increase interest rates, just not at the velocity that they did.
Yeah, but he ended up conceding because his malicious strategists, they said, look, if we spin this as unions are the problem, we can kill all unions in these 3 years. We weren't alive, but we've
seen the effects of it.
We've seen the effects of this history. So all unions, as you see the data, has gone like that, right? The last 25 years. And it's because it's because good political spinning. Volcker increased interest rates to kill inflation, and they blame basically unions who couldn't get with reality in the global marketplace, global competition, and all that stuff. Competitive. Exactly. So unions disappear. The increasing inflation rate, increasing the Fed rate worked, right? And then we have the fake boom of the 80s. And then that leads to the 87 crash. And what happens like
supply side economics, Chris?
This film, by the way, for the audience is really picked because my friend just wants to trigger me on every comment here, dude. This is like guilty pleasure of his. Like supply side economics is bullshit.
No. To be fair, he does the same. We go back and forth. This happens both ways.
Yeah, well, I gotta start picking like Sicario or something. Sicario the sequel.
We already did Sicario.
No, the sequel, dude.
Dia de los Muertos or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah. I've never seen it.
Don't you dare.
But anyways, but you're right. Greenspan, he comes in, and it's funny that people think he's going to be this hawk because he comes from like, the Fed, the pipeline. He ends up being like the biggest bubble guy. He keeps wanting to decrease interest rates to like 0.000 when it's not the right time, because they just had the 87 crash, and then he wants to fuel another bubble. And then he basically fuels three bubbles, right? He fuels the tech bubble, and he fuels actually the beginning of the mortgage bubble. And yet this guy is like now like doing conferences. He's like, yeah, the Fed needs to increase rates. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? Sorry, go ahead.
I think you'd probably agree with this to an extent. They just lower them too quickly, where once inflation and supply chains were running amok, now the only way they had to go was up, and it's just wreaking havoc. Whereas if they kept them a little higher, the damage that is currently happening in terms of inflation, all these, might be a little less.
Yeah, I do want to bring it back to the film, but what I will say is that what's changed between the last,
like, all of these things are intertwined, and talking about this film, you kind of have to bring context from the government level all the way to what's happening within the.
Well, Margin Call, if I had one fault with it, which is hard for a movie like to capture everything, is that it focuses on the firm.
Yeah.
And where The Big Short succeed is that it does talk about the government's role. Because here, Margin Call, it's all about the firm's moves, and they eventually dump all their bad, try to get buyers, basically try to scam, try to get people to buy, but they don't. That's only half the story, right? Because in the end, nobody would want to buy this, right? They were early, so there's stories that this fake firm was early, so they found suckers. But eventually, there's no suckers anymore. So who has to become the buyer of last resort? The taxpayer. To save the economy, whatever.
Who also just takes the fall is oh my gosh, what's the firm that had to go under? I'm blanking.
Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. And what's interesting is that on Wall Street, the reason those guys got ousted is because those guys were not the guys that were licking the hands of the government. Look, can't be a correlation between Goldman Sachs running the Treasury Department and other important financial public institutions and Lehman Brothers going to the curb, who was Goldman Sachs' biggest rival. I mean, I'm just saying, it's just like, it's so obvious, like they got toasted.
So what are your thoughts on GSEs?
What's the full term of that?
Government sponsored entities, aka Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Okay, dude, let's get back to the film. Anyways, let's get back to the film, dude. What is this? This is not like me ranting, dude. Anyways, go back to the film. So anyways, let's go back to the movie. Anyway, so I think, okay, like we talked about a bit of the beginning. Eric Dale gets fired. They have the meeting. I thought the scene about like, why are you working at MIT was also of the time, right? Like, or not MIT, at the firm, right? He was a rocket propulsion scientist, but he's honest. He said the money is just better here, like for my life and my career. Mm-hmm. And this is talked by Bethany, the author you're reading a lot, when she gives interviews, saying like there's been such a talent suck into finance, and you would argue that maybe not for the betterment of not just our society, but the world, it shouldn't be the case. Right, we shouldn't have our best minds just working on crunching numbers because we just want to make more millions of dollars,
Yeah, and not really adding any value to the real economy.
Even though many people on certain podcasts would disagree. But anyways, I can't say his last name. I don't want to get sued, but his name is Jason. But anyways, they're the enablers of they're the enablers of creativity and entrepreneurship and the benefit of society.
Right.
Anyways, but I think that, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree, the movie really takes the next level when Jeremy Irons' character gets involved.
I think everybody, like, because what ends up happening first is like it's brought to so Peter Sullivan and who was the other associate was Seth. So Peter basically comes up with this model, and Seth, who's another guy on the risk management, they're both junior associates or something like that. They discover that, Peter discovers that this model is out of whack, that this is like a crisis level event for the firm. And then he's like, Seth is out at the bar with Will Emerson, who is like the boss. Basically, Will is their boss's boss, but their boss got fired. So now the only one who has direct tie to them is Will. So they go back, they look at the models, and they're like freaking out a bit once they realize truly what's going on. And then they call in basically Kevin Spacey's character, Sam, and he shows this, and he's like, But Sam's like, I don't understand. I do love that when they show that the higher ups don't know what the heck is going on or what any of this means, because their brightest minds are actually like the junior associates. That kind of cracked me up a little bit, because Kevin Spacey's character comes in, and he's like, I've never been good at reading these. Just explain it in like layman's terms. And he's like, dude, we're way over leveraged than we previously thought. And he's like, we just found that this just happened today. He's like, no, we've been way out of bounds of the model for the last 2.5 weeks. And like, it's like shocking. Like, you can see the expression. So then they call an emergency meeting, and they bring in Simon Baker's character, Jared, who, I know him from The Mentalist from way back when. But they bring in his character, and he you think he's the boss when he comes in. He's a young guy, and you're not really given any ideas to what his title is, at least not to my recollection. And they bring in him, and then it's Demi Moore's character, Sarah. They're looking at the models, and they call the all hands on deck meeting, and they're like the big bosses come in.
Yeah, before we get to that, so they don't like give his title, the Patrick Sweeney's character, but the other guy like says that he's a rising exec. Yeah, like he's rising fast. Yeah. Like the way that this movie also works, the way people talk to each other. Like certain people talk to Jeremy Irons' character like I bow the head, and others talk as equals, and others just talk down. That's how you kind of tell in this movie where the roles are. Yeah,
but you didn't know. Like everyone could tell. It's like, oh, because that's even Peter's character. He's like, I thought Jared was the big dog, and he's like, no. Jared's on his way up, and he's not there yet. And they bring in Jeremy Irons' character, flies in by helicopter on his helipad, which is he's like the top guy in the firm. You want to take it over from here?
No, I was gonna just say you did a great. You're doing great at the summary. No, I was gonna just chime in that when what's his actual name? Jeremy Irons' character. Let me look it up.
It's John Told.
Told. Yeah. When Tobe, he has a great line where he says he's here to the reason he's in the big chair. I love that line because he says I'm here to make the real big decisions that affect everything, it's on his shoulder, so he's trying to get all the information before he makes the call, right?
Yeah, and so what ends up happening is, right, he sits at the head of the table, he's a big guy, and Jared's character is trying to explain what's going on because he has basically the prospectus of what he came up with his summary. It's like this giant book of basically summarizing what his findings are and what the hell is going wrong and what this really means, right? That's basically the summary of his book that they're passing around, and they're failure analysis report. And so you go and they're looking at this, and he's like, dude, I want to speak. And John's character is like, I want to speak to that dude who actually put this on Mr. Sullivan. And then he's like, dude stands up. He's like, I'm Peter. And he's like, explain this to me as if I'm like an infant, a toddler. He's like, because I assure you, I didn't get to this position just based on smarts or something like that, which was, he had so many good lines in this movie. I was like, hilarious. And so he's going, and basically he's like, we've taken on a lot of MBS's, mortgage-backed securities, and from basically our payout from these has been incredibly profitable, as you probably have known. And the dude's like, yes, I have. And he's like, we assumed when we bought these, we were taking on a certain amount of risk. Based on our models, that model was incomplete with all the inputs, and we have been out of bounds for 2 weeks on this. And he's like, so what does that mean? He's like, well, the amount of risk we're taking on is more than the entire worth, basically, of our company, our total assets, which is not what you want to hear if you're running a company, because that means you're done. You're going under, and you're going under quick, because all of these things are worthless. And they are the first ones to realize that it no longer makes sense to keep these assets on the books, because they're not assets anymore, they're liabilities. And their model finally woke them up to the reality of what the hell was really going on. Right. And so then he's like, all right, well, we know what the problem is. Thank you. And then he's like, let's get our risk analysis team in. And he's like, what's our next move? And he's like, that's Jared's character. And he's like, what can we do? He's like, sell it all today. And then that's when the big back and forth is between Kevin Spacey's character and Jared Cohen. The other line I forgot, which was great. And he's like, no, I'm talking about our decisions. He's like, we have 3 moves. He's like, you can either be first, You could be smartest, or what was the other? Do you remember the line?
You can be first, smartest,
Or cheat. And I've never
or
been a
yeah.
cheater.
Yeah. So he's gonna be
I'm
first.
smartest, so we got to be first.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yes.
Oh, it's such a good line in that.
Yeah, another subplot is that they also start looking for the guy they fired for most of the
Yeah,
movie. They're like, "Oh crap, we need this guy back," you know.
Here,
And then
here.
and then he gets a nice little like silent like be quiet package, you know.
That's what I do, dude.
Yeah,
Sign
sign a few NDAs and get your
Or
little.
Yeah, NDAs.
And I've gone through that process. It's
Dying of laughter, like seeing that.
yeah.
Yeah, so at the same time, they're looking for this because they want to basically keep him quiet and make sure he doesn't go and tell everyone else what's really going on. Is basically based on his findings that he gave to Peter Sullivan. And so, so then there's a big conflict as to what to do. And Jared and John are on the same boat that they need to sell it all. And this is where I like Kevin Spacey because he gives pushback. He's like, if you do this, there's no coming back. All of these dudes who I am responsible for, they will have burned every bridge that they built up selling these products. He's like, they'll be hosed from this industry. And the dude, John's character is like, dude, it's doomsday. He's like, we don't have another choice. Give him a bone. Give him a couple $1 million bonus if they hit certain milestones, like 95% sales rates, things like that. Personally, and that's how they end up going with that.
Yeah, because in that kind of dire situation, you want to be first, and that's what's also what happened in real life. People started selling, and then they had to stop it.
What was that Talladega Nights line with Will Ferrell? If you ain't first, you last. It's basically what he was trying to summarize here. You're gonna be caught holding the bag in the end, and it's not gonna be pretty.
Yeah, it's.
I love a lot of the characters, like even Kevin Spacey's. He's like, dude, how did we screw up so royally? And some of these moments that you have with Kevin Spacey and Jeremy Irons characters.
Oh yeah, and the cafe is good, yeah. And then even though the firm is going through a bloodbath, they're gonna promote Peter Sullivan, and his other guy didn't make it.
There's a lot of money to make in the next couple of years. I don't need you on for 36 months.
Yeah. Because even in a down market, there's opportunities. You know, you can short things. You can, you can make different bets than you usually do. And honestly, that's what kind of happened. You know, in real life, they got that garbage off their books. They were able to keep going their lifestyles and fly private jets, and it's how it works in Wall Street.
Downsize. That's what they did. I did love that scene. I think when Kevin gives his talk in the morning to all the day traders. What did you think of that scene?
That was a good scene.
That was a great scene, I thought.
I mean, Kevin Spacey killed it in this one, but one of his better acting performances in the last 10 years. So.
Oh man, I thought that it was phenomenal. Especially I really like the scene as one of my favorite in the movie of when they're zoomed out and you just hear them calling, trying to sell. It's like the bells rung and they're going mad. And he's like, I got 350 MBS from this at 50 per. And then they're negotiating back and forth. And then they're you could see the panic in the other buyers, what the hell are you guys doing? He's like, just some spring cleaning. He's like, that's not what we're hearing. There's a lot more than just cleaning. That was a good line.
Yeah, I went from who were biting and to the other phone calls were hanging up. I'm not taking this then. Yeah, it's I've never been on a trading floor, but it must be chaos. Even though now I hear that it's just more people.
Back in the day, back in the day was been crazy.
Yeah, but it's
87 crash around that time.
Oh yeah, they're like take my sell. They would go on the paper. The problem is if there's no seller, the price keeps dropping. I mean, no buyer. I mean, if you're trying to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this film again. We're going back to what I said in the beginning. It captures a moment in time, and also the ramifications of what happened in that financial crisis would be felt for the next era. But going back to the film, yeah, I think because Kevin Spacey's character has an issue, right? It's not just his obviously his traders who obviously built relationships have burned it, but also I think he also says that the reputation of the firm will suffer, right? I mean, that's logical, right? Because you sold crap to people, and then
you knew it was worthless, and you sold
them
knowing it was worthless.
which is fraudulent, but we won't get into that. But Jeremy Irons is his character Tobe is
fraudulent though. This is what my curiosity.
If you know something is not, there's one thing that
aren't those proprietary models? And
that's where the movie. That's where the movie. So you can't convict Kevin Spacey for fraud, but you could probably convict the firm and even maybe the risk, because we all know that a lot of their MBSs were not AAA.
But is that on the firm?
It's on
ratings agencies.
It's a gray area. Probably why they didn't convict them, but it's probably on both sides, because they also I'm regulated.
So this is my question for this firm in this scenario: are they the ones who got these assets, these MBSs? Are they the ones that got them rated, or they buy them from another firm who got them rated? That's where it gets really dicey.
It does, but also as somebody I'm personally regulated by FINRA, I have had to do some trainings, and I will say, if you are doing your fiduciary duty towards your client, so that's the thing. They probably broke. See, that's illegal. They already broke the fiduciary client to their clients, right? They're selling stuff they know, so that's illegal. Okay, I know this because I go to the damn training every freaking year and I hate it. And you see in the movie, they know what they're selling to their clients. So they broke at least their fiduciary duty, which is illegal. The thing is that these regulatory agencies, they got to pass because they do this all the time. Like a certain person says on a certain podcast, oh, these were excruciating circumstances. We couldn't control. We had no choice. I'm telling you, would a murderer get away with that? I had no control. I had no choice. Like, really? Like,
you're talking about? Who are you talking about?
A guy that does backs. Anyways, that's
Sri Lankan that we might know.
Yeah, that that's his excuse for whatever behavior he's done the last 2 years. I can't control this, but yeah, it's so I'm not an expert in the law in that realm. I just know that from what I go through, if I had behaved that way on a smaller scale, I would be charged. I sold you, or I told you to buy this, and I knew it was BS.
That's the whole thing out of this whole the whole financial crash, right? There's only one person went to jail. It was someone who worked for Deutsche Bank or something like that. It was just one low-level dude, and that's it.
Yeah, and probably because he messed up submitting a paper or something. Like technicality.
He's the fall guy.
Yeah. What?
You've seen The Wire. It even works at that. Gonna take the charges for everybody. That's what the banks are no different. They have their fall guy.
Exactly.
You probably paid him out hefty too.
Probably, yeah. To be quiet, dude. What I like the most is when Henry Paulson is a Secretary of Treasury, and then they don't ever really talk about how he got a big payoff when he left, like $50 million. Dude. Yeah, but and then Timothy Geithner, another crook. But anyways, there's so many crooks in that era that now they're still crooks. But
it's even in the private world too. That's just how it is. It's how the game's played. Yeah, even on the tech side. This is off topic. I never understood why Carly Fiorina, who was with Yahoo, and she the stock price went down on her tenure, and yet she got a $70 million payout. For what? For doing a bad job?
It's executive compensation is interesting because it's all built into it's an at will employment, but there's always built in clauses and whatever. So but it
should be performance based.
Yeah, well, they have agents that but going back to the film, I will say another important aspect that they kind of go through is the low-level guys, right? They go out looking for there's some side conversation. Remember when what's his name? Not Peter Sullivan, but his the other guy and the Will, I think it's Will, they go in the car and they have that big monologue about you think people what is it there? The rant was people are gonna blame us because it's on fire. But without us, they wouldn't exist. I remind me of somebody. It reminds me of somebody that I've heard this from, but who lives in Europe. But who lives in Europe?
Haven't you even heard this at CS conferences?
Yeah, but I mean, I can believe that a little more.
Coming from the dude in CS.
Yeah, but I've heard it with like like oh we're
You're
without
talking
these
about people who have irrelevant careers.
yeah yeah. Well, even though I wouldn't argue all. What I would argue is that they have an impact, but they're overvalued. But
Mhm.
it's but I've heard this from salespeople that believe like they're making the world move because they sell whatever BS that they sell. But
I'm not gonna
uh
take shots, 'cause I know a lot of people in sales, not just that.
yeah. Yeah, so it's but that car ride is actually really it's a good scene about that basically about that because even though the guy is I think the other junior guy understands he's gonna lose his job,
Mhm.
but he's telling them to like don't he's worried about his job, but like he's got like it's what's the term like you creep up your spending as you get more income. Like he's got this expensive like ex-wife and like this flat, and like the guy's genuinely worried that he's not gonna be able to pay any of that up because he's levered up, dude. And I think the film is also trying to tell us that like people like companies lever up, but also people levered up in that era too. Um,
Just in that era?
I mean, we're supposed to be living in a much more controlled era now, so.
People, dude, people are leveling up like crazy. Oh, speaking of which, did you see? This kind of ties in because we're talking about leverage and which is basically debt, or not basically, it is debt. Did you see that the court blocked the Biden move for student loan relief or a
I
student
did.
loan? Yeah,
I did. And I still
leverage.
yeah, I also still question and the college system, it's another movie. They can make another movie about that. But the I will say that like my issue with that specific law is that I don't understand how see that to me is just weird. How if he's allowed to do that without any congressional like approval, then why hasn't this A been done before? And B, why didn't I learn that you could do like
You
I
can't.
still think it's illegal what he's doing. Like
It is, but beyond that too. If we really want to get into it, the university system and the university system, banking, and government are all tied together. So people stand to lose a lot. There's a reason why they still make this one exemption for student loan debts. That this is the one type of debt that you're not allowed to declare bankruptcy on legally, which is completely absurd. Why is it? It's because a lot of these people don't want to lose money for loans that they gave out to college students that a lot of people aren't going to be able to pay off in any reasonable amount of time.
yep.
Pretty much what it is.
And the schools they benefit from this system because they can keep charging and they know like the money will keep flowing. So
Yeah, pretty much.
and yeah, it stems from
Talks about like bad behavior and debt, like absurd amounts of debt that a firm took on during the financial crisis. But these sort of stories played on in many different aspects too. Just people taking on more debt that they can really handle.
yeah. I mean, credit is a tool, but it's a tool that's often abused because people it's addicting. The cure to that credit.
Look at what's going on in China today.
Yeah, don't worry. They have a strong man leader putting people to jail. So
Strongman leader, and yet they can't do anything with their housing development because they're so great. People, I mean, this film talked about how crazy indebted these firms were. Evergrande, that's a whole nother level of craziness. What is it, like $350 billion in debt liabilities?
yeah, and what's under I mean, I'll give this to Bernanke. What's I think, understudied a little bit is because it's so recent, I think. And I think with more time, people are going to study this more intently, as historians usually do. Is that Bernanke, he did do something that was historic. I mean, he said, like, because it had never been done before, right? There's been financial crisis, there's been firms go bankrupt, and this is obviously a bigger crisis, but it never been done before to leverage your central bank's balance sheet. Granted, I don't think every country could do this, obviously, but the
Japan,
reason I
would beg to differ.
I mean, Japan, yeah, I mean, they do weird stuff over there. But anyways,
what were they at in 2016? They started negative interest rates, which
yeah,
I still don't understand quite how that works.
it doesn't work. But anyways, but what I'm getting at is that there had been no real attempt to basically do a global bailout, because that's what ended up happening. You know, every central bank ended up meeting in Brussels and bailing out everybody. But when you, I know you mentioned Evergrande, and I think it was a serious issue, and I think I think it was good that there was coverage. But the reason I had to see more to see the fallout is because I know now that this is their playbook. Their playbook now is, if there's any of this crisis, we will just
Pump liquidity.
We'll pump liquidity, and then there's the key. And then they have to work with the institutions that they have pumped to keep the capital locked, because they know once it flows too fast, inflation is too out of control.
We shall see how this plays out, because even with their smaller regional banks, they're having major issues in China that's just not getting reported.
Well, it's because China has this other issue, which is the shadow banking system.
Corruption is what you're talking about too.
Yeah, but this is why I think they're going to be the first ones to use the CDBC crypto coin, because I think what China has realized, like I have, is that the only way to get out of this hellhole is to reset the system. And so what you would do is you would just do this reset into this new currency.
What does that?
I don't know.
Play out exactly.
Yeah, I have to like study up more on it, but it's basically how many old civilizations have like changed from one currency to the other. Like they've changed from gold to whatever, or
yeah, through a lot of changes.
Yeah, I have to study the Great Ray Dalio book to understand that. So
in the 1800s, even in the U.S., there were like 7 different currencies that were in play.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not common. There's a way to do it. I'm not an expert. That's why I gotta lean on Ray Dalio. But the
way to do that peacefully is the whole issue.
Yeah, China's not gonna do it peacefully. They're just gonna put drones in everybody's houses, dude. Anyways,
blow up certain. It's crazy. I mean, they prevented people in some of the regional banks from accessing their life savings, even though they were supposedly accredited. And there was so much protest that finally they caved into a certain dollar or like yen amount. But I remember seeing an interview. I felt so bad. She's like, this lady, she's like, I have like $150,000 saved up. I can't access it. I have a new kid. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
but that's the Chinese model. It's like, well, that's too bad for you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate with finance. People are always under this mistake that they think like the money they have in their account that says in their balance is what the bank holds, but they don't hold that.
No, well, no, it turned out that, what was it, the regional leader of that bank embezzled I don't know how many millions of dollars, and like he flew off, and so then the bank was in crisis because everything was in flux. I don't know how they're going to solve all that, and no one knows to the extent of how many times that's happened at regional banks in China. But more the issue, and I think you would agree with this, the only reason our monetary systems work, any monetary system, is just with trust. And I think that's where China's financial system is a little teetering, because I think people, given how many protests you see, I think there's less and less trust in their institutions. It's happening.
Actually, that's a good segue into something I did want to bring up is, and it relates to the film with credibility, like what Kevin Spacey's character says, that like this year, I've heard a lot of talk from podcasts from, I would say Gen Z, Gen Z is like, they're anybody under 25, right? Like young, new incoming, like I think really smart, that people younger than us even that are into like covering finance, like they're like promoting through YouTube or TikTok, and they say a lot about like the Fed, they're increasing rates and they're being aggressive because it's important to them to keep their credibility. Going back to your point of trust. Now, I lost credibility in the Fed a long time ago when I was a teenager, but to me, it's very concerning that now I see way more interviews with Fed chairmen that I didn't even know about, like when I was a kid, and now they're doing interviews like with you podcasts. It's like
Kashkari or people like that.
Because it goes back to that other book I read a while back, who worked in the Fed. She was a woman that worked in the Fed. And she said like the Fed's mistake they're making, the biggest mistake, it's not even like their monetary policy, which she disagrees with. The biggest mistake is that they're becoming market and economic, basically focal points. Like they're no longer the silent guy in the background. They say something, the market does this. They don't do something, the market goes like this, and the economy goes like this. It's too much power for one institution.
I mean, why you feel bad for Kathy Woods, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That letter, that open letter was just that's sad. But because she's convinced that deflation's coming. I'm like, well, I think people are waiting for that because right now inflation's killing the market. But but they're so fixated on the meeting minutes now. And like I go like, okay, the meeting minutes are important, but like there's an actual economy still. Like these guys are not, like you said, to your point earlier, they're not, putting, McDonald's bags and fill food. They're not driving trucks. Like, yes, their finance is important, like it's a part of the system, but
They think, and this is what even shout out to Kyla Skitton, who was on the compound recently, was talking about. The Federal Reserve only has so many tools that they have at their disposal. It's just to increase the velocity or decrease the velocity of money in the economy. But they can't fix supply chains or anything like that.
no, she's wrong. They have new tools because of the illegal crap they did the last 10 years. They can buy. When we had the COVID crisis, they were buying mortgages.
Sure, yes. I agree with that. But there's
and then when it was really bad, they were buying companies.
Hold on,
Are you kidding me?
They were in a back doorway, but they
illegal. They should all go to jail. So I'm now triggered, dude.
At the same time, they can't fix supply chains that were broken during COVID, which are leading to a lot of choke points in the economy in terms of goods that are delivered that are driving up prices. No matter what tools they use, they don't control the flows in that way. They control financialization tools and things like that, but they can't do anything to bring more truckers and get truckers moving at a faster rate of delivering goods.
And you know what my next line is going to be right now, right? This is why Bitcoin needs to be the world reserve currency.
Why?
Because it's decentralized and it's a stable
right. In the decentralization, where do people store their Bitcoin on? This has always been my issue.
We'll figure that out.
They store it on a centralized platform. So how does that make any sense? And you've seen some of the issues with Coinbase and Binance and all of these. There's no perfect solution. That's a big issue.
People need to have their decentralized wallets like I do.
What it was cracking me up was when people were storing it and all of a sudden Coinbase was restricting trading of like Bitcoin when the price is dropping. I was like, this is hilarious. It's decentralized currency that is being stored on a centralized platform, and it has the same issues as our typical currency.
Well, that's because of the firm. But if you trade on Uniswap or a decentralized platform, which again are not that big,
it's not fast enough at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of issues with the technology still.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying like you can get out of the centralized trading platforms
like Ethereum.
But
get that they haven't updated that protocol.
To your point, it's something that's Apple has taught me in my life is that in the end people want like ease of use. And so Coinbase is a master of that. I understand that it's hard to keep your wallet and then trade on a decentralized platform, but there is a way. I do want to push back a little bit. There's a way out of the centralized trading exchanges, but it's not convenient.
It's no. And what do people like the most, Chris?
They like being forced to do the inconvenient. I was reaching for straws there, dude.
It's one of two pathways, and one's more convenient. People, by and large, not everybody, because there's always people like you, are going to take the convenient path.
I mean, I like the convenient path too sometimes, but
resistance, which has its own issues.
Yeah, but it's anyways. Circling back to your your point about the.
We go. Sorry about this. When it comes to like financial movies and things that are Swiss, we go on a tangent. So we apologize for this. And it's partly because we like this movie so much, so it makes us tie in everything.
Well, I think the thing is that finance and politics are also so intertwined. We've been avoiding. I mean, we mix a little bit of the political stuff, but look, you can't look in a vacuum. This is why I never understood it from the people who don't like who won the election in 2016. Is that you can't look at that election as just like, oh, it's a one-off. Americans are dumb and like racist and like bigoted. It's like this recovery.
Man, you're going full circle here.
This fake recovery. That's the thing too that ticks me off. That like we were paraded by the second Obama administration that we recovered when all underlying metric data was fake, and then people are shocked that people are mad. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what these people like live in my neighbors, like they're just so delusional. like I can't believe this stuff sometimes. I'm just like, you guys don't understand nothing, dude.
That leader didn't really do anything to solve any of these issues. Not he exacerbated or made it worse in many ways.
it's like you bail out financial institutions. You don't put any of them in jail. Okay, fine. But then you don't even make the consumer whole. You don't go and go, you know what? You got foreclosed. We got your back. I'm not saying.
No,
you
I
argue-
agree with that. It makes me so mad that some of these people, they lost everything, and that they didn't get any bailout or any type of relief.
None.
That was even my issue with oh man, we're gonna go on big rant. That was even my issue with a lot of COVID business relief packages. Most small businesses, people that were forced to work and were left with nothing, they didn't get half of these loans. Despite what I know personally, some people who applied and weren't able to get any relief. And that pissed me off because some of these bigger entities were applying and trying to scoop up some of these PPP loans.
They did scoop them up too. It's because they know how to work the system. They know how to get the the right lawyers. They look at all the
right
PPP loans. That was I don't even want to get into that. That was crap. But even the more egregious thing was them buying company bonds to keep them afloat, and also mortgages.
All of the airlines.
All the airlines. Oh,
was it that went on CNBC crying about how the hotel industry is done, and then meanwhile, they got bailed out, and he made a profit because he bought them at the lowest.
Oh, Bill Ackman.
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
And it's funny is that I listen to him almost every time I get a chance. One of the great. How do I say this without getting sued? One of the great modern investors of our time.
Scummy, dude. That was scummy behavior.
When I say modern, it's because a lot of modern investors, they act that way now. They say one thing, but they're playing their book. Right, because he also doesn't disclose on air that he's one of the largest holders of Hilton. You should be disclosing that if you're asking for help here, and it's it happens over and over again. And I think, unfortunately, they just know how to work it. I mean, I learned from the best. Jim Cramer in an interview says you say something on CNBC and then it moves and then you make your trade based on that. It's okay, dude.
By the way,
and yet this guy is not in jail. How is this possible?
The video, I believe, got removed from YouTube. But guess who kept a version downloaded?
You did, right?
I'm gonna upload it.
Wait, did it really get removed?
I think so.
Wow, man, this censorship is strong, dude.
Hold on, maybe it might have gotten re-uploaded, but I think one of them got removed.
You might have to upload that on an alternative site, dude.
What is it? Rumble?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, what was it? Jim Cramer? What was it? Interview? No, it's still there. Hedge fund tricks.
God,
I think it's that one.
That.
I think it's that one. Huh?
Yeah.
Or this dissects Wall Street scam.
Jim Cramer admits how his hedge fund manipulated the markets.
This is on YouTube, and apparently it's all legal. So, but it's legal because you're right. We saw Bill Ackman do this. We saw many people who are notorious investors go on CNBC, go on Bloomberg, say something which made sense, you can say logically if you didn't know anything else made sense, but then you see their book and you're like, okay, dude, how about you say about an industry you're not invested in, dude? No, they gotta save their skin, dude.
I remember during this time, Cramer was crying about how it's a bloodbath and they don't know what they're doing and they need to come throw a life raft.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember seeing that live. He was on TV crying, saying the people I care about are hurting out there. They're at the brink. This is affecting lives. Yeah.
All of his financial investors. Meanwhile, he doesn't give squat about people who are about to have their homes foreclosed on. Scumbag.
No. That's just what do they call it? That's just
collateral damage. Is what it is.
No, it's not even that. It's it's the market's working. Yeah.
Oh my God, these people are disgusting.
Well, it's because they just they want to save themselves and their pie. It's going back to the margin call finally. That's exactly the mentality that Jeremy Irons has, right? His character. Yeah. I need to save myself. I need to make sure I'm good and I can eat another day.
Very Darwinian. It's just survival of the fittest. Is how he envisions it.
That's how they envision it, and yet it's a rigged casino.
Yeah.
Because if you have access,
he doesn't want to think of it. He thinks we need to survive. We need to be the first. That's all this game's about. Forget what everyone else is doing. we're gonna survive.
Yep, bulls and bears, dude. Bulls and bears, the animal spirits. Yeah, yeah. But it's a great podcast, by the way. But I was gonna say like,
By the way, I'm curious. How come you didn't give your thoughts on government-sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
because it's out of my expertise.
That's not true. We could have like a long forum on that, though.
There's a lot of problems with government. I mean, yeah, I mean I guess to be fair, the origins of those programs are altruistic for the people, but then they just become more financialized tools of the elite. And
Well, they end up being like they're kind of like what do you call them? They started out as trying to be guarantors. It's very complicated, and then they ended up becoming like utilities, and that they're kind of government like oh god, another disgusting organization like PG&E in California, who they have backing, they have a lot of government sponsorship, and yet they act like a private entity with a board and investors. Which, by the way, that's something that I don't understand. How can an electricity company that has no competition really, because it's a utility, have like investors or like people buy that?
it's called the greatest grift I've ever seen. You know, you basically are guaranteed a return. Like that's like, it's like, how do I become an investor? Like, you kidding me? Like, you have no competition, you get all the money. Like, it's like, and then it's still misrun, It's like, how, like, I mean, that's the argument.
They got sued over that fire that they created in California.
The pipeline. Yeah. Honestly, when the anti-communist attack socialism, it's like, I see your point. The monopoly, it clearly disincentivizes any normal brain thinking, because like you would think they could milk this for 100 years and they still screw up. Like,
oh, totally.
So that reminds me. Go ahead.
You want to get back to the actual film?
Well, yeah. One last thing I'll say on a random tangent, because we're already there. I learned recently that like in the late 80s, the most common cause of TV fires in Russia or Soviet Union at the time, not TV, house fires, was the TV sets exploding. Yeah, it's a good like. Fun. Yeah, I'm not trying to bash communism too much here, but like it shows you the problem monopoly states, but also.
Yeah, because there's no reason to reinvest or make things better in a way.
But those kind of details, and this is like before the official collapse happened, that you see that like the things that, you know, we take for, I'm going to quote Peter Zion here, the things that we take for granted in a civilization, like the technology and like, you know, the ease of use and like the stuff we take for granted, that when the society and the civilization starts crumbling, things like that become problems. Like I didn't even realize that. I was like, that's crazy. This is not even that long ago. I mean, we're not born yet, but it's like, how is it the leading cause in 87, 86? Like, this is nuts, dude. Imagine that we had said that today in America. Like, we would think like,
I don't think that's
really wrong.
Of fires here in America.
Yeah. So sorry, let's get back to the film. But I thought that was an interesting fact on just, you know, when things go wrong.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of competition. Things are poorly made. That's what happens. Not a ton of regulation either, and mass corruption in Russia. Yep. But anyway, do you want to give your final thoughts? I mean, we kind of summarized the concept of this film was basically how one firm realized there's a big problem, and you know, it took immoral routes to survive.
Yep.
Summary, which kind of is a microcosm of a lot of the events that surrounded the financial crash.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll start with my final thoughts first. I would say the acting, amazing. Demi Moore, I forgot how good she looked back then, but I prefer Jennifer Connelly. But moving on from that, I would say Kevin Spacey was really good. Jeremy Irons, obviously a legend. I thought, again, the pace was good in the film. The script is actually really good, even if you don't know much about finance, because you when they say words like risk and computer models, you can kind of just guess. I thought they did well in capturing different aspects of a financial firm, not just like the traders and not just the, you know, the risk guys and not just the big level heads. I would say my only fault of the film, and this is a fault of, I think, a lot of coverage, except for maybe The Big Short, but I would say most films, because I think a lot of books like the one you're reading and others do cover it, is the role of government played in enabling this crisis, and the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. And I think I maybe this film didn't want to tackle that, but I have seen documentaries where like they barely touch on it too. So I feel like it is a cultural problem too that we have, that we haven't really, other than people that were there, they dug in. A lot of people in the mainstream, if you talk to most people now, they don't even, like, especially younger people, they just think like, oh, like we did what we had to do. It wasn't pretty, but it's like
history of how this came to be a problem.
Yeah, and it's like
Book, shout out to Bethany McLean, but yeah, the book's called All the Devils Are Here, but it details, the origin of this back in Long Beach, California. And basically how all this stuff started sprouting from normal mortgages, and it just kept getting high rate, and then eventually, like a lot of these, like you were saying, what's the term you used, where it wasn't the traditional like financial route, but it's kind of the shadow banking. They kind of went in the shadow banking route where they were taking on high risk, high mortgages, and that became normalized and incorporated into the more mainstream tools. And that's where a lot of these problems sort of came to fruition. It was a lot of these. What was it, like Countrywide Financial and all these? It's a long history and a lot of players.
Oh, Countrywide, I remember them. I remember reading so much about those guys. Those guys are such crooks. Anyways,
there's the guy, I believe, the Bronx, who started that too, back in Long Beach.
Of course.
Oh yeah, the birthplace of all of this stuff was Irvine, California.
That's nice. Well, I mean, I'm not that surprised because California real estate is a special place.
Especially the LA region. Oh my God. And Orange County, this is two incredibly self-absorbed, delusional, like almost surreal places.
Yeah, so I'm not that okay. You just wanted to say that because you don't like that area. I mean, that was very like targeted. Like, there's a lot of surreal, delusional places, dude.
A good bit on that. Just go watch Tim Dillon's bit called "It's a Knife Fight." Kind of detailed real estate in that part of the world, and this has to deal with my bias being raised in Northern California.
Okay, yeah, the Bay Area real estate is also not that great.
Oh, it is. It's got other issues.
Yeah, but yeah, I would. So,
place, one of the fakest places I've ever been to in the country is Orange County. Sorry,
I haven't had a privilege to go there, but I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. But yeah, I would say for me, 9 out of 10. One of the great films of the financial films, which is it's hard to pull off actually if you think about it. Because like with any like even films that you do with like science or whatever, it's hard to pull off like that balance of like you want to do right by the actual expertise, but like if you dumb it down too much, it becomes basically just a normal bland movie. But if you get too sophisticated, then unless you're really into that field, you're like, what am I watching? Like, I don't understand this, So I give him credit on that. I think this film, it's very watchable, and also I think it holds up still. I think it holds up even with my minor critique on one aspect they don't really touch upon. Because I have a hard time believing, Alexis, that in those meetings, when it's that dire, there's not on the other listening in or also on the call, like, some maybe the NY Fed, not even the Treasury Secretary, but like the New York Fed, like, really? You're going to have a hard time, especially when they started trading. They have to be getting phone calls, right? Even if it's like you want to believe the government's good in this case. I was like, they shouldn't have omitted that, but it might have just been glossed over or they didn't want to tackle it, I have a hard time believing, because I know this because I work in a place where, from time to time they're checking in, so it's like they did all this without nobody calling like, yo, you're moving a lot of material. Like even that would have been okay, but I'll leave it at that.
What did Jeremy Irons' character ask Ramesh, I believe was his name in this film? He's like, if we do this, will we get any pushback? He's like, when they catch wind of what we're doing, they can slow you down, but they can't stop you. But that was his line. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So maybe there's a little bit more than we don't know because we weren't in that world.
Yeah. Well, I know an investment banker now, so that world is interesting. So they work a lot, though.
I'm sure that. Well, don't they typically pull like 70-hour weeks?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty rough. Well, that's why they go out like crazy when they go out, because like that's the only release they get. So
Yeah, it's a brutal world. Some people only like last, what is it, like 8 years there?
Yeah, it's high burn rate. Get paid out and you leave.
Yeah, not
All right,
surprised.
go ahead.
All right, so I will echo pretty much everything you said in terms of the acting. I thought Kevin Spacey and Jeremy Irons killed it. Obviously, even the other characters like Zachary Quinto, his character was good. Penn, I'm gonna butcher his name. Badgley. He was okay. He was a more minor role. He was the other junior associate. I thought he was fine. Demi Moore's character was great as well. And so pretty much everyone in this cast killed it. I thought that the material is obviously something we're interested in, so that kind of biases us in a way. The other thing that I will say that I really liked was sort of the tone and the style of filming this film. It was very dark in terms of its tone throughout, which it was a dark time in U.S. history. We both remember this. We were in high school when the financial crash was happening, and I didn't quite understand all the dynamics with it at the time. I just remember there was a lot of despair. There was, we lived in the Bay Area, and it was astounding. A real estate in the Bay Area is like usually super hot. Like it's over. To me, it's overpriced, but it's always like usually there were few for sale signs when I was a kid. But then during that time, I remember like every other house had like for sale signs. Like it was a dark time, and a lot of people lost a lot of stuff. So they really captured that feeling of kind of despair during that era, and put that into this film because they were going to do some shady things. And that was also echoed by the fact that everyone was wearing like kind of black suits, very dark tones, dark colors. Where it almost felt like when they were filming this that there was some sort of filter that made all the colors, all the vibrance of it kind of saturate in a way to give it this sort of dark feel or ominous feel to the film, which I kind of did appreciate, and I think did favors for what this film was trying to present, because there's a lot of pretty dark material. I think you would agree with, and then they knew they were going to set up and really screw a lot of people, which ended up happening. But overall, I thought it was good. I do agree that in terms of the focus, and it's so hard because the scope of this problem touches so many things. The scope was pretty narrow in that it was just one firm's focus, and it was just from the bottom to the top down. I didn't really touch on the government or on any connection to the government. Didn't really talk about even people that they might be selling to who are kind of the suckers, things like that. I think that could have added another little layer to the film. But because of that, I'd have to agree. I got to give this film a 9.
Yeah, nice. Tied up here. Anyways, I actually will I'll end you can end it officially, but I'll chime in with one little personal story here about
Sure.
for the movie. So I look back, I'm an old man now, and I see that the financial crisis, especially that era, affected definitely how I viewed politics until I was 27, maybe, before I like changed a little bit. But for me, it was crazy was the timing. Like, so obviously, so to get more context, right? There were people predicting something was going to happen, right? So Nassim Taleb, Rubini, there was many others. Chris Martin was one of them. So actually, the year before the markets kind of like fell to the bottom, I watched Chris Martin's crash course. It's really about like the dangers of fractional reserve banking and how the economy is not really built in a sustainable way, and blah blah blah. Then I got into everybody else, and actually, I have the privilege of saying I was one of the first readers of Zero Hedge, which is now a really popular financial site, which has some political slants. But before, they used to just do like they used to just like focus on the economy. Now it's become more of a cultural touch point. And yeah, I remember at one point when we were in high school, I was like going home and I was reading like, Global Mish. He's another blogger. I was obsessed, and I think I look back and obviously I gained a lot of knowledge, but the only problem is like, I even wrote a letter so when there was the bailouts, I even wrote a letter to Feinstein. I wrote a letter. I couldn't even vote yet. I was so pissed about this topic, dude. I have the letter too, It's in my, no, I don't have the letter. I have the response. Which was her little secretary's blurb and then her speech that she gave on the floor. I have it still somewhere in my email. I don't have my email that I sent to her, but I did submit a letter. I wasn't voting age, but I think people don't understand how big a moment in American history this was. Because at one point, it seemed like the financial system that we all kind of knew was going to go to nothing. And you knew that they were worried too, because I've never seen until this day, I haven't seen even the COVID crisis. I've never seen CEOs other than the airline guys. I've never seen bankers grovel and beg for, hey, yo, we need the biggest help.
Oh, the airlines did during COVID.
Yeah, so I mean, other than them, but I've never seen bankers. Like, could you imagine now Jamie Dimon begging Biden for like anything? Now the guy talks with such bravado. But I just want to end with that personal note that like this movie is not, it's not like in the 50s. Like it's a cultural touchstone to like a generation, and also
in fact, a lot of people were millennials.
Yeah, and I think, and look,
precedent for what's going on today.
And they go full circle. I'm just focused on that, let's say like 2007, 2009 era. Full circles, that's how I got into Bitcoin. I mean, I was so obsessed and pissed about the system and like, you know, the central bank that like I kept going further and further. And then I came across the white paper that was published
by Satoshi.
Yeah, to Satoshi. And then I didn't understand it at the time. It's funny because I had yet to be a software engineer and it was really confusing to me, but I understood the economics of it because I read so many damn blogs. And it's funny how like that is still kept with me. And like I find that watching this movie remind me that like I watched this when it was in 2011, but also like a decade has passed and like I've evolved, but like that era like is a very like, at least for a personal journey, was more of a, it formed me more than I realized. And like, it was good to reflect on that because it also led me to darker places, unfortunately, you know, and it led me to turning to a type of politics that I would never have agreed with when I was young and idealistic, but I became so angry at the machine that, you know, I'm not going to go into any names or anything, but I'm just going to say like, I went to this corner and then to come back a little bit, like it took some time, but you know, I don't think people understand. I think people don't understand today, especially the people around me, that like there's a distrust of like New York Times and the Washington Post, like, and other like let's say cultural institutions, like whatever, government and whatever papers, because you know, we feel like we've been like deceived so many times, right? Even the COVID crisis, you could argue there was still another level of deception, you know, of like, you know, we all need to like, you know,
well, that's what
stop. Yeah, go ahead.
Especially when some people just didn't understand what, and I'm like, personally, this is just a personal thing, like I'm vaxxed, things like that. But my issue with a lot of that is people didn't seem to have a lot of understanding as to why certain groups may be skeptical of things that are being forced upon you by the government, specifically certain minority groups. And that always kind of like puzzled me because I was like, if you look at history, there are plenty of things that were presented under the guise of like being helpful that really had sort of nefarious consequences. I'm thinking like the Tuskegee, like, you know, syphilis experiments, things like that. It's like you got to understand where people's heads might be at that may have that are informed by a different experience other than your own, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of people have trouble with that.
Yeah, I think you said this off air, but I want to reiterate your point that like I think a lot of people, they have selective empathy. You said this before we went on air, and I think that's what happens here. That people think that like, you know, X person is just dumb or whatever, and it's like they may not be like, you know, your college nice little diploma, but there's a reason they think this way, and it's because of things they've seen, right? They probably saw like people get on opioids. They saw people get like their mortgages closed, their lives destroyed, like, and that's the problem with when I hear the rhetoric. When I didn't share the podcast with you. I wanted to, but I didn't want to trigger you that much. When I listened to Barack Obama, you know, earlier in the week, talk about the midterms and his, you know, the Democrats and, you know, big picture. And I go like, okay, this guy was a popular president that was voted twice with big electorate, especially the first time. And yet it's almost as if he has forgotten like the decisions he made. I don't think he's forgotten. I think he selectively decides to just not bring it up. But like, you know, people were able to move on and get through it, but other people, they're still stuck there. I mean, I think that's something that people forget too. And when people talk about why this country, like politics is broken and stuff, and I think it's because there's just been so many wounds that have not been reconciled. I think when those things become more reconciled, the country will heal. But until that happens, I just see it continuing because there's not an acknowledgement. I would say the elites of my country that they messed up. They still talk as if They talk like, you know, some of the podcasts that we make fun of, you know, that they did no wrong. They know what's best. And like, you know, you are just, you're there to serve me. It's like, and you don't understand how like that could piss people off and they want you to be ousted. Like, I'll leave it at that, but I just want to leave on that note.
Like a lot of people portrayed like NAFTA, the original NAFTA under the Clinton administration when it was signed, as being purely positive. It's like that's not the case. It has negative consequences for some people, some communities, and that can build up resentment, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Just things like that.
We'll cover that in Sicario too. I was kidding.
It's hard to-
No. We got to do